I'm a professional diver, Anon. I posted a story of mine a couple weeks ago or so. Not going to write it up again, but I'll give you the gist of it. I was doing body recovery on contract for the police. Found a body and attached a line and started swimming to the surface when something grabbed the body and started dragging it at incredible speed. I cut the line just in time to prevent myself from being yanked down with it. I'm sure some of you deep-sea loving anons will remember it. I've got a couple other stories of my own that I can go into more depth with if you guys want. Mostly stuff involving fish that were a bit too big for comfort coming to take a look while I was doing some welding. Or that time my rebreather malfunctioned and I started to have a full-blown drug trip while I was 200 meters underwater. Fun stuff. I've got a ton of more interesting stories though, mostly from other divers. I can't speak to the truth of them because I wasn't there. Some are pretty out there. Keep in mind, some of these stories are sort of like diver urban legends. They get passed around until nobody can remember where they got started. The story I'm about to tell you though, I heard from a good friend of mine, a dive master and the guy who trained me on my first dives. I have no reason to believe he's lying. This was back sometime in the late 80s, I believe. My friend, let's call him Frank, had just gotten out of the Navy and started doing civilian work, mostly welding, and he started with the police for a short time like I did. Like me, for Frank, diving was both a hobby and a job, so he would spend his weekends exploring known shipwrecks and points of interest known to the local diving community. Sometimes he would just set anchor in a random spot and dive down to see what he could find. He usually found a whole lot of nothing, but on this particular occasion he hit the jackpot, metaphorically speaking, because there was nothing good about what he found. He was doing an extreme depth dive that day, which, as I explained in my last post, I'm not going to name the lake he was diving in just in case it somehow leads back to him, but it was a very large lake that was 900 plus feet deep. So he was pushing the boundaries a bit, especially since he was solo diving without any partners. He gets to the bottom, and as per usual, there's just the usual sand, silt, and some rocks covered in algae. Not even any fish that he could see. He digs around in the sand a bit to see if he can find anything, and he feels something hard and smooth buried a few inches under the surface. Frank grabs it and tries to take a look at it a bit further away up from the floating sand. It was some sort of prescription bottle with the label worn/torn off. So he puts it to the side and keeps digging, finds something much bigger right away. He pulls it out of the sand, and to his shock he's staring at a human skull. He digs around in the sand some more to find the bones, pretty much feeling his way around because the fine sediments he was digging up made his visibility zero. He found something else hard and pulled it out, but it wasn't another bone, it was another skull. He kept digging around and found, on his estimate, at least 200, likely more, skeletal remains at the bottom. Mixed in with the skeletons were, his estimate, thousands upon thousands of prescription bottles like the one he found earlier. He didn't have enough time or oxygen to stay down for long, so he dug around in a few spots to see how large the dump of bodies and bottles was. He estimated it must have been almost 50 by 50 feet roughly in size, so it's possible that there could have been many, many more bodies there than his estimate. Probably the spookiest bit is, since he had done his work with the police, he knew what a body looks like underwater at various stages of decomposition. The bones had been picked clean by the fish, but the bones themselves couldn't have been there for much longer than 5 years. Like a good citizen, Frank carried one of the skull pieces up with him to the surface. He talked to some of the people he'd worked in the police with as a diver, and they immediately told him that they were not going to investigate and that he should never speak about it again. Being someone who valued his own skin, Frank did just that, and ended up moving to the other side of the country about a year later. He never told me why, but I've got the feeling that he no longer felt safe working or living there. Okay, time for one of my own shorter stories. Frank has more interesting stories than me, but I want to share some stuff from my own personal experiences as well. This actually happened just last year. I was doing some maintenance/repair work on a dam for an artificial lake. I had chosen this spot to work in particular because it was a treasure trove for exploration as a diver. Since the lake was artificial, there were several small villages, farms, and homes that had been submerged when it was constructed. Something that's actually surprisingly common when it comes to artificial lakes. So, I was down at the bottom of the dam, doing a visual inspection of the gate guides and seal plates, trying to find anything that needed maintenance or replacement. It was summer, so the water was pretty murky and visibility was low. Something shoved/nudged me on the back and I turned around expecting to see my dive partner, but instead I was staring right in the face of the biggest, ugliest catfish I've ever seen. Water does weird things to your perception of size, but I could swear this thing must have been the size of a small SUV. If it had wanted to, it could have eaten me no problem. I froze in place because I hadn't expected to be in danger from the aquatic wildlife on a freshwater dive, but he swam away and circled around for a while as I worked. It's actually fairly common, fish watching you while you work, but I've never seen one as big as this before. I'm just glad he wasn't hungry. This next story is a bit out there, so to speak. I trust Frank, but being deep underwater can do strange things to the human mind. Narcosis can and does cause hallucinations among other mental disruptions. I've experienced it myself firsthand. When it's happening, your brain can't distinguish reality from hallucination, and there's never a point in your mind where you go, "Oh, wow, I'm tripping." Because it's usually a case of the frog boiling where it comes on you slowly. Anyway, back to the story. This was probably late 90s to early 2000s? Frank wasn't really clear on the date when he told me the story. Frank at this point has graduated from casual wreck exploration to full-blown treasure hunting. He's got a boat with sonar designed to find shipwrecks and all sorts of neat stuff. To this day, he hasn't found anything of actual value, but I suppose the thrill of the chase is a treasure of its own. It was the long weekend, so Frank was making a big expedition to a remote part of the coastline where an old ship apparently sunk in the early colonial period. Nobody ever found the wreck. Their route was known, but there was a storm and they never arrived. The location was extremely remote. You either got there by boat, almost a 2-day trip from the nearest suitable launch, or you hiked there on foot. Frank figured that the remoteness of the area accounted for the wreck never being found, which is why he was so keen to search himself. He still talks to me about going back there today, since he now has a portable sonar system that you can mount on a canoe. He didn't have one of those back then, so he just packed a bunch of food and supplies for the weekend along with his diving gear. I doubt you could even carry a canoe with you on that hike, but if anyone can do it, it would be Frank. He gets to the ocean, sets up camp a ways from the ocean in a sheltered nook, then drags his gear down to the ocean and goes for a dive. First day, he just snorkels mostly. Second day, after he has a lay of the land, his words, not mine, Frank decided to go diving. He only had 2 cylinders of air with him from the hike, so he had to make his time count if he wanted to find anything. The entire expedition was ill-advised in my opinion, but Frank does what Frank wants. Apparently he thought he knew exactly where that damn wreck was, because he had figured out where the currents would be pulling any debris. So he sets out for that spot, swims in, and dives. Frank gets to the bottom, and to his disappointment, does not find a shipwreck or sunken treasure or anything really of interest. There's just a lot of various debris and shit. Some pop cans, trash, and garbage even. Just when he's about to give up, he hears the telltale sign of a boat motor coming from the surface. His immediate instinct is to surface and say hi, but his instincts were screaming something else. So he decided to wait and see until he ran out of oxygen and had to surface. He swims up a bit closer to the surface to see if he can find the boat, following the sound. He sees it come in above him and cut off the engines. Something big gets tossed into the water and begins to sink like a rock. Frank said it was immediately obvious to him what it was based on the silhouette, but he couldn't really fully realize it until the man had sunk past him, eyes bulging with shock, screaming with empty lungs. Frank followed him to the bottom as fast as he could. When he got there, the guy was still conscious, but barely. He pulled off his rebreather and fitted over the guy's face while trying to free his legs. His legs had been put into buckets full of cement. Frank alternated breaths on the rebreather for about 15 minutes while desperately trying to break the guy's feet out of the concrete, without any luck. The whole time, the guy was trying to talk to him, trying to say something that he couldn't understand. After about 15 minutes, Frank realized that he couldn't get his legs free. If he stayed down any longer, he would run out of air and die himself. He said leaving the guy down there to drown was the hardest damn thing he ever did. The poor bastard realized Frank was leaving and frantically grabbed him, trying to rip off his rebreather and keep it for himself. Frank ended up kicking him in the face and swimming off without looking back. He reported it to the police and they found the body about a week later. It was a mob-related killing, apparently. It actually happens more often than you think. I don't think Frank ever got over what happened, the way he described it. First the pure relief and joy when Frank gave him the rebreather, and then the agonized panic fear when he realized Frank was leaving him. Being someone who dives for a living, I've had lots of friends who drowned on the job for various reasons. It's not something you really dwell on a lot, but this man always stuck with me. What the hell was he thinking in his final moments? It's probably due to my line of work, but I've got a bit of a fascination with death. Or rather, the final thoughts right before death. That last final spark before everything gets snuffed out forever. I have more stories to tell you, anons, but I've got to go do real-life shit now. So, if this thread is still here later, I'll come and post some more. If not, I'll post them in the next deep-sea thread that I come across. Thanks for all the kind words. Oh, that's the black carpet, allegedly. A bit of an urban legend amongst deep-sea divers. I'm that diver anon if anyone was in the last deep-sea thread. I've heard about this thing a couple of times from coworkers and buddies. I don't remember the details of the full story right now, to be honest, but I'll talk to my buddy sometime and see if he remembers and post him on here. But the basic gist that I can remember is that this thing is some sort of colony organism, like a giant moving coral. It's a giant black carpet of macrobiotic cells that crawls over the ocean floor, sifting through nutrients with millions of tiny feelers. Nobody has ever gotten a good estimate of the size other than it's big, and apparently it makes noise similar to this bloop thing. One guy apparently saw it swimming/riding the currents as well, so it does more than just crawl on the ocean floor. I suppose you could call it a one-of-a-kind organism, but I'm not sure if that applies to colony organisms like this.
Macrobiotic cells. So you're saying the ocean floor is covered by a giant jellyfish?
Essentially, yes. According to how the black carpet has been described to me, it shares many similarities to a jellyfish. One story I heard had a diver getting stung by some sort of large feeler strand that apparently hangs off the top, similar to a jellyfish. There was this really old retired diver that I talked to who claimed to have seen it. He claimed to have seen an entire decomposing sperm whale being consumed by the carpet. I should really make a post compiling all the stories I've heard about this thing.
If it's similar to a jellyfish, and is actually a colony of microorganisms, then it might be related to the Portuguese man-o'-war.
The way I've heard it described, it shares more similarities with a starfish or sea anemone than a jellyfish. The marine biologist who said he'd seen it had some interesting thoughts on what it was. His idea is that it's some sort of holdover or descendant from the very first invertebrate forms of life on Earth. He did a whole long talk about how coral is one of the oldest forms of life on the planet, and the reason why the ocean is the only place teeming with large invertebrate creatures is because that's where all life first evolved. In his mind, jellyfish and all other sea invertebrates probably evolved from this thing rather than vice versa. This giant sea carpet or whatever would have been one of those very first forms of life to ever exist on Earth, technically making it one of our ancient ancestors. It's a pretty cool theory, all things considered. So I talked to my buddy, and I'm going to start writing up some of the stories I've heard about the black carpet. This is the first story I've heard of it, from some Finnish bloke with a strong accent. He was doing a deep-sea dive repairing some sort of cable. I assume it was probably fiber optic. As he told it, initially, he thought he was in the wrong spot because he couldn't find the cable anywhere. He starts searching and eventually finds one end. Just the one. Sheared clean through. He gets his dive buddy to stay with that end of the line while he goes looking for the other end, swimming in a straight line in the direction of the other line. In his estimation, he swam about a half mile before he found the other end. He stressed to me that the entire half of the middle section of the line was just completely gone. It was like a huge deal and everyone thought it was the Russians, but this guy was sure that this carpet thing had done it. Said he heard the noise it apparently makes even though he never saw it. This next story is from my buddy. He heard it from a guy who heard it from another guy who heard it from another guy, so take it with a heavy grain of salt. This guy is doing a dive. Depth, location, what he was doing never got specified, just that he was really deep. He starts hearing this odd noise that gets associated with the carpet a lot. The way he described it was similar to that of the video of the bloop. Ultra low pitch, sort of like a super creepy distorted whale song. As he gets closer, he hears this almost static crackling noise as well. The way he described it was like a million prawns getting cracked open at once, if that makes any difference. As he gets closer to the bottom, the noises get louder and louder. At this point, he was thinking that he's hearing some sort of sonar from a submarine and that some jackass submarine crew is playing a joke on him. When the guy gets to the bottom, he shines his light around, trying to find whatever he's looking for, and what he said was that the sea floor had literally come to life and was crawling past him. This is probably the best description of the carpet you're going to get. According to this guy, carpet is at least a mile long and wide, made mostly of these strange black feelers that apparently makes the strange popping noise. Most of the top is covered in various sand, rock, debris with feelers poking through. Also a few long transparent stalks, as he described them, that float upwards. Apparently some of these were like 20 feet long. According to the guy, it was singing, which doesn't make any fucking sense to me, but whatever. Guy swam back up to the surface and claimed that he had an equipment malfunction. Came back down a couple hours later and got there just in time to see the last of the thing disappear. Apparently it stretched as far as the eye could see, which isn't that far at the bottom of the ocean, but still. This one is an old urban legend that's been floating around the diving community for years. Never heard a concrete source of it, so in my opinion it never happened. Especially since it involves a submarine crew, so I'm not sure how a diver would have heard about it, since as far as I know, submarine crews usually stay inside their ship. Anyway, here it goes. Submarine is doing something, either war games or patrolling for Chinese, Russians, North Korean bad guy submarines. The story isn't terribly consistent about this, I hear it different every single time. For whatever reason, they are not using active sonar because they want to avoid detection, floating dead somewhere a couple hundred meters off the seafloor. They're just sitting there, chilling, and listening with their sensors trying to detect enemy submarines or whatever, when they start hearing the noise. Their sensors can't make any sense of it, and it's getting louder at an alarming rate. Starts out as something only the sensors can hear, but before long the entire crew is hearing this strange, distorted humming or singing that people always associate with the carpet. Captain thinks the only explanation is that it's some sort of new sonar or jamming technology, and orders the sonar crew to send out a ping to locate the source of the noise. This is the part of the story that stays the most consistent. I assume it's because it's the most memorable. The sonar operator shouts out, "New sonar contact, bearing... sir? What's our depth?" The captain replies, 500 m, or whatever the depth the submarine is supposed to be at. The sonar operator replies, "But, sir, the sonar says the seafloor is 10 meters below us." The captain says that's nonsense, then walks over to the sonar station. Checks the reading, then walks over to the helmsman and checks the depth. Checks the nautical charts for where they are. Somehow, apparently, the ocean had gotten about 200 meters shallower. The captain orders another ping from the sonar to try to locate the source of the noise. Sonar operator speaks up again, concerned. Sir, the ocean is getting deeper again." Captain asks him to repeat himself. "Ocean floor is once again at expected depth, sir." Captain takes a look for himself, and sure enough, they are no longer 10 meters above the ocean floor. There is also a very, very large dot on the screen behind the submarine. Captain asks what the large contact is. Sonar operator: "Equipment malfunction, sir." Captain pings again, just out of curiosity. The equipment malfunction has maintained its shape and is continuing to move further away from the submarine, and apparently taking the strange noise with it. Again, this is basically an old wives' tale amongst deep-sea divers, so take it with a grain of salt. It's possible that a submarine detected the carpet or whatever on sonar, and that's the origin of the story, but I highly doubt this actually happened. Still makes for a cool story, though. Last story for now. I'll see if I can dig up some more later. This is from the old guy I talked about earlier. Nice guy, marine biologist who has done both deep-sea welds and nature research/studies with ROVs. Apparently the carpet ate one of his ROVs on an expedition. According to him, it happened late one night while the rest of the crew was sleeping. He was pulling an all-nighter studying the sea life around the volcanic vents. He's moving the ROV from one vent area to the next when he sees what he described as churning sediments on the seafloor, a giant moving cloud of underwater dust essentially moving towards the ROV. He moves in closer and sees what he describes as a colossal echinoderm crawling along the seafloor with long, dexterous filaments probing the seafloor ahead of it. He maneuvers the ROV in for a closer look and uses the arm to prod one of the filaments. In the blink of an eye, he lost contact with the ROV. Apparently it happened so fast he didn't even see it happen. 1 second the thing was about 5 meters away from the vehicle, the next second it had swallowed the thing whole. His excuse for not having footage was that the footage was all recorded and stored on the ROV rather than being recorded on the operating station, which seems fishy to me. He was, however, very confident in himself, to the extent that he claims that he is the discoverer of this new species. He even gave it a name, which I completely forgot because it was so stupid and boring. Giant sea carpet sounds cooler anyway. Way back in the mid-1980s, I read in a book on cryptids that there was something called the hide. Apparently it was a flattish thing with eyes along the rim, about the size of a large cowhide, hence the name. From what I recall, the one observation was of such a creature rising up out of an underwater trench to absorb a shark who had somehow become paralyzed by it. It was observed at some distance by a diver. Does any of that ring a bell to anyone? Supposedly took place somewhere off the Pacific coast of South America. I've heard some people who claim to have seen that thing, or similar things. A lot of stuff I've heard from other divers seems like they could be attributed to very rare or large siphonophores that live in the deep sea. What you're talking about was described to me as some sort of pancake-shaped creature that would hide under the sand with a single small, near-transparent tentacle floating upwards. A diver touched it, spasmed, and immediately the creature rose out of the sand to devour him. Don't touch strange shit you see in the ocean, people. May as well go on a tangent and talk about some other stories that I've heard that might be attributed to siphonophores. There was this one cranky old retired diver who swore he'd seen a monster of unfathomable size on a dive once. I always assumed he was full of shit the way he described it, but it sounds a lot like a siphonophore. The story went something like this. He was on a dive doing something that I've forgotten when he sees an absolutely giant tentacle stretching up from a nearby drop-off. The thing was so huge he couldn't see no beginning nor end to it. And so now he goes around constantly claiming to have come within a hairbreadth of devourment by a gargantuan sea leviathan of unfathomable proportion. And yes, that's exactly how he talked. Looking into these siphonophores, it makes total sense that something like this could exist, though it would be less of a sea monster than a giant serpentine jelly blob sifting through plankton and floating nutrients. Another siphonophore-related story I've heard is one about an absolutely gargantuan jellyfish-type creature that was allegedly the size of a military submarine. The diver who saw it said the thing was so massive it had somehow developed its own biosphere with various species of fish circling around and swimming inside of it. He described it as having an appearance like a giant upside-down orchid suspended underneath a massive sphere of translucent jelly. The coloration was very dull, but that might have just been due to the extreme depth. This story is off on a bit of a tangent, very much out there in terms of believability. It's not a very widespread or widely believed story, mostly because of how crazy or supernatural it is. If you work as a diver for long enough, you're bound to run into a few people like this. Ultra superstitious guys who believe in all sorts of curses, black luck, sea monsters, etc. A common belief you'll find among many of them is this deep-sea deity, god, demon called Davy Jones, who roams the seafloor searching for divers or sailors who have displeased him for one reason or another. Whenever someone or something is lost at sea and never recovered, Davy Jones has got it. What makes this X-related is the description one guy gave me of this Davy Jones, because it's pretty spooky. The guy claimed to have seen on one of his dives a trail of giant footprints approximately as long in length as he was tall, so about 5.5 feet long since the guy was pretty short. And though he had never seen it himself, he claimed that one of his friends had. This Davy Jones was a bipedal humanoid that stood over 200 feet tall on tall, stalk-like limbs that was walking along the sea floor, kicking up great clouds of silt behind him as he walked. According to this guy, to look him in the face is instant death, for his visage be too horrifying for any mere human to behold. He was probably just fucking with me, but still a cool, spooky story to put on here for you lads. I met the guy while I was working in the Hibernia oil field in 2009. Fun story. I refuse to do any oil rig work now because a lot of it is really sketchy and you end up having to pull a 10+ hour shift while doing very delicate work deep underwater, and I was afraid after that big Mexico oil spill that I'd fuck something up and cause a massive spill. So yeah, I don't do jobs like that anymore even though they pay really well. Yes, well, to be more specific, I saw a hallucination of my dead father because the oxygen injector on my rebreather had malfunctioned on a dive and gave me a bad case of narcosis. I was definitely hallucinating, but it really felt like him, if that makes any sense. The one at 409 looks exactly like a very small version of what I heard the black carpet is described as. I'm going to try to get in contact with the old biologist guy who saw the carpet and ask him some more questions. So I finally got a hold of the old biologist guy on the phone and talked to him about the sea carpet again. According to him, it's not a siphonophore. He qualified that by saying siphonophores are not fast or mobile. They survive by basically floating around, expending very little energy, and occasionally snagging a meal with the neurotoxin stinger tentacles. He talked for a while about what makes the carpet seemingly a biological impossibility. According to him, something of that size wouldn't get enough food or energy to survive and keep up its level of activity just from scavenging sediments on the seabed. Siphonophores can get really, really huge because they sort of sit around and let food come to them without any energy expenditure. So the profile of the carpet fits more with an active predator or scavenger than a passive one. I mentioned to him that I'd heard stories about decomposing corpses of whales being seen by some people being digested by the carpet, and he got really excited about that. His working theory is that the carpet is an entirely unknown form of life, in the sense that it's a colony organism similar to a siphonophore, but the individual cells are much more complex and capable than those of a siphonophore. Keep in mind this is purely theoretical stuff he's pulling out of his ass to try and explain why something that should be physically and biologically impossible might exist. He's studied siphonophores quite extensively, and one thing that remains a mystery is how the cells communicate, considering they have no central nervous system or brain to speak of. They're basically just big bacteria. The key, apparently, is high-frequency vibrations. He hasn't been able to prove it just yet, because it's damn hard to get your hands on a siphonophore to study, but he thinks that individual cells vibrate to communicate with one another and pass a message along the entire organism. His theory is that the carpet is basically the siphonophore equivalent of a Russian nesting doll. Rather than being a colony of individual cells, it's a colony of individual multicellular siphonophores and is therefore the missing link between single-celled life and complex multicellular life. The bloop noise which the carpet apparently makes is actually millions of these creatures communicating in their own primitive language. Since siphonophores can reproduce asexually, he envisions the carpet as constantly evolving in size and shape depending on the environment and amount of food it can consume. So, perhaps after consuming the carcass of a very large creature like a whale or giant squid, it would be extremely large and have a large amount of cells, but would eventually shrink as it self-consumed unneeded cells. The multicellular structure of the carpet serves a twofold purpose, both serving as a distraction for potential predators similar to a lizard losing its tail while running away, and a long-term storage of nutrients. Since big meals are few and far between at the bottom of the ocean, the carpet stores its energy it consumes by creating more cells and growing larger, which it will consume between meals whenever it needs energy. Not just that, but he's very convinced that the first forms of life on Earth evolved in the deep ocean near volcanic vents, making the carpet the oldest existing form of life on the planet by far. He talked my ear off a while, but I don't have much more interesting things to tell you guys other than this for now. Though I feel like even though this is X and people come here to hear about supernatural or weird stories and shit, this is just the hypothesis of one guy who apparently saw the carpet once. It's by no means the definitive truth, and this guy hasn't ever actually been able to perform a real scientific study on it. He just saw it once and has been drawing conclusions from what little knowledge he has. Have you heard of raptures of the deep? Few people have. 30 meters below the surface, water pressure alters the properties of gases within the human body. What was once harmless or vital begins to poison your mind. The deeper the depth, the deadlier the poison becomes. Symptoms include impairment, euphoria, laughter, anxiety, hallucinations, hysteria, terror, and death. And yet, we still venture into these depths, risking our lives and minds, delving into a place where the barrier between the mind and reality becomes thin. Those of us who return can bring with us only memories of that alien world beneath the waves. These are some of those memories, tales from beyond the depths of madness. My first story of the night is not set in the depths of the ocean, but rather on the surface. This story was told to me by the captain of a ship I was on for research work. A good Aussie chap, he always had a good yarn or story to tell about life at sea. At the beginning of his career on the sea, he was a greenhorn on a commercial deep-sea fishing trawler. They mostly caught black cod, though a lot of other fish got caught in the net and discarded. He said that the deeper you laid your nets, the stranger the things you'd pull up to the surface would be. Beyond a certain depth, the fish become inedible, their flesh transforming into a pale, gelatinous substance not long after reaching the surface. One night in particular, it seems, this crew set their nets too deep. As the nets raised out of the water, dripping wet and filled with pale, wriggling fish, it became apparent that something was wrong. The fish were screaming. The noise was unbearable. Some of the crew ran below the deck and the rest put in earplugs. After some debate, they opened up the net on the deck to examine the fish. The captain swore that when they did, he saw fish with human faces. Distorted, corpulent, distended, but unmistakably human. And they were screaming. Pale blobs of flesh with drooping face, fleshy nose, and black eyes, wretchedly screaming in anger, pain, or hate. They were quickly thrown overboard and the crew fished in shallower waters from that point onward. The next story is one of my own. Those of you who have been in previous threads might recall me talking about this briefly. I was doing a mixed gas dive at the bottom, which is 60 meters at this point of the lake. Mostly I was just looking for valuables or other odds and ends that had ended up at the bottom of the lake. When I was a kid, I lost a tooth on a boat trip. I think that's when my fascination with the deep began. My mind fixated on the idea of my tooth sinking to the murky bottom and lying there, lost to the depths forever. I enjoy finding those lost things and bringing them back to the surface. It's so rare that you can bring something tangible with you from the deep. On this particular day, I brought back with me something that was intangible, yet infinitely more valuable than any treasure. I still had over half my cylinder and was enjoying skimming over the lake floor, sifting through the sediment and whatever odds and ends had ended up there. Out of the blue, I had a powerful intuition that I was being watched. I turned around and saw a man standing there behind me on the ocean floor. He smiled at me broadly and waved his hand. That's when I recognized him, in a sort of stilted shock. I was face to face with my dead father on the lake floor, 60 meters below the surface. He pointed to my cylinder and said something, his face wrinkled with concern. Well, he tried to speak. When he opened his mouth, only bubbles came out and I couldn't understand what he was trying to say. He pointed again directly at my oxygen regulator. It slowly dawned on me what was happening. My equipment was malfunctioning, giving me an improper mix of gases that, at this depth, can result in raptures of the deep, narcosis. At this point, I was aware of the fact that I was hallucinating. I should have started swimming back immediately, but I couldn't. I had left so much unsaid to my father. He had died in a boating accident a few years before, and I hadn't ever really gotten over it. He was just there one moment and gone the next. I never said goodbye. You have certain regrets when someone dies, things left unsaid. I always mulled them over in my mind. I wish I had said this. Why didn't I tell him that before I died? And I finally had the chance to tell him those things. To have that goodbye. But I couldn't speak because of this stupid rebreather in my mouth. I started to rip off my mask and rebreather so I could tell him, but he grabbed my hand. I yanked against him and tried to pull off my mask, but he wouldn't let me. Frustrated, I screamed into my mask, bubbles floating up around me in a stream up to the surface. And then I felt him pull me into a hug, the kind he used to give me when I was a little kid. And in that instant, I just knew he understood. That he knew. That this was him saying goodbye. When the bubbles cleared, he was gone. I swam back up to the surface, spent a few minutes at my safety stop, and then surfaced. I know it wasn't real, that it couldn't possibly be real. Besides, I don't believe in ghosts. I know I didn't really see my father or my father's ghost down there. It was probably a manifestation of my subconscious desire or some shit. I'm not a psychologist. Even still, it's hard for me not to want to believe that it was real in some small way. That my mind was more open in that state and he reached out. I'm not sure why. I guess it's just that it felt like he was there. It felt like him. It felt so goddamn much like him. God, I miss him. This story is also one of my own. It happened in Hawaii during one of my many diving vacations. It's a damn beautiful place with great weather and even greater views underwater. While I can appreciate the dark, murky atmosphere at the bottom of a lake, there's something definitely enchanting about crystal clear water filled with colorful, exotic fish. It's certainly much less frightening than any of my deep-sea dives, especially the ones that involved me welding vital components for hours on end, with even the smallest mistake having potentially devastating consequences. That, however, does not mean that it was not dangerous. You are always in danger underwater, whether you realize it or not. It is not your house, you don't live there, you don't belong there, and most importantly, in the water, you are no longer the world's apex predator. You're in a much, much bigger pond. Keep that in mind if you ever go diving yourself. It might just save your life. Even a small thing could kill you. In this case, it was a moray eel. Now, morays are known for being vicious, but most people don't know that they're also very intelligent. I like to call them sea demons due to their disturbing combination of cold intellect and raw aggression. If one bites you, the best way to get it to let go is to cave its skull in. Otherwise, good luck getting it to let go. That in and itself isn't unusual, but when it's paired with the uncanny intellect, it gets a little bit scary. This moray in particular was the king demon of all sea demons. Not in size, he was about average for an older moray. What placed him above all others was his pure dickishness. He tried to fucking cut my oxygen lines. I felt something tug at them violently, and I spun around to be face to face with this fucking dickhead. I could just see how fucking smug he was, that stupid fucking face. He knew what he was doing, and I knew that he knew, and he knew that I knew. So I pull out my knife that I keep for defense against sharks and cutting myself free if I ever get loose, and I show it to him. See? Look, it's shiny. If I poke you with it, you die. He knew what I was doing, too. He didn't seem worried, and he backed off a bit. I kept an eye on him the whole way back to the shore. I swear the cunt performed a moray equivalent of flipping me off, and he finally swam away as I was nearing the shore. Moral of the story? Morays are cunts. Don't fuck around with them. Okay, all done with my own personal stories now. This next story is supposedly bona fide true, taken from the journal of a now deceased biologist/researcher. I haven't seen the pages of the journal myself, but I'm working on getting them sent to me if possible. I'll share them with you if I ever manage to get my hands on them. For now, enjoy an abridged version. Date unspecified. Just heard a sperm whale on the hydrophone. Very unusual for this area and time of year. Frequency a few hertz lower than normal, possibly a new subspecies. Date unspecified. Pod is upset. Still hearing the sperm whale. Haven't seen Marv today. Hope the old codger is okay. Date unspecified. Pod remains agitated. Second day in a row without a sighting of Marv's scarred old dorsal. Starting to get worried. Date unspecified. Heard Marv on the hydrophone today. Good to know the old man is okay. Date unspecified. Keep hearing Marv on the hydrophone. He sounds distressed. Pod is still agitated. Date unspecified. If this keeps up much longer, I might dive and check up on him. Date unspecified. Pod is extremely agitated. Nudged me back to the surface when I tried to dive. Date unspecified. Illegible. Date unspecified. I'm not sure if I should write this down. I feel like I'm losing my mind. What I saw couldn't have been real. Date unspecified. It's killing the salmon. It's not eating them. They just float to the surface to rot. They're refusing to eat the dead salmon. Won't be long before they starve. Date unspecified. Motherfucker started singing again. Date unspecified. I guess I'm going down to try to deal with this thing. I don't think I'm crazy. I'm going to write down what happened on my last dive in case something goes wrong. I used the hydrophone to roughly triangulate where Marv's calls were coming from. Checked the depth, got my gear ready, and dove. The pod kept nudging me back to the surface, but I kept swimming down and eventually they stopped, circling me from a distance and making odd, mournful noises that I had never heard an orca make before. I pressed on, determined to find Marv and get to the bottom of what was happening. Poor bastard. After a certain depth, the pod gave up trying to stop me and circled from above, crying out in their odd way. I reached the bottom, but I couldn't spot Marv immediately. I could hear him, but I couldn't spot his location. It sounded like he was right next to me, even though I couldn't see him. I figured at the time that it was the channel walls bouncing the sound around and continued to search. Eventually, I found him. He was floating, immobilized and trapped in some sort of strange, translucent substance. He seemed unresponsive, but I could still hear him. It seemed impossible he could be alive after so long underwater, but he still seemed to be vocalizing. Took out my knife and tried to cut what I assumed at the time to be degraded plastic packaging of some sort. The instant my hand made contact, pain came ripping up my arm and pulsed through my entire body. I saw stars, and when I came to, I was floating immobilized next to Marv. I tried moving, but I was completely paralyzed. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. Slowly, I felt the tendril that had wrapped around my arm begin to tug me downward. I frantically tried to turn my head and see what was below me, but I couldn't even move my eyes. It continued to tug me down at a snail's pace, turning my body with it. As the sea floor tilted into view, I realized something was horribly wrong. The sea floor was writhing, the sediment shifting and pulsating. As my view tilted further downward, I saw what the filament was pulling me down towards. Protruding out of the mass of writhing sand was what I could only describe as a massive sea anemone of some sorts, with bulbous protruding growths reaching up from the sea floor towards me. And inch by inch I was being dragged towards it. I couldn't scream, I couldn't cry, I couldn't even close my eyes. All I could do is watch as this thing reeled me in like a fish. The fucker took its time. Either it was slow or it liked its food well marinated in fear. I'm sure there's worse ways to die, but this is probably pretty high up there. I was pulled in, inch by inch, until it grasped me. I can still remember the sensation. Thousands of feelers pinching my arms and face, rough like sandpaper. Pulling me further in, I still couldn't move, but inside my head was screaming. The mass pulled me in further in with a rippling motion, each pulse pulling me further and farther down. I think I accepted that I was dead somewhere around the time my head was completely pulled into the mass. All I could hear was the rough rasping of the thing as it rubbed against my mask, pulling me deeper into itself. I'm not sure if I blacked out or went catatonic after that, but when I came to, I was floating freely in a cloud of murky sediment. All around me were the same bulbous, writhing feelers that had pulled me in, but disconnected and squirming alone, directionless. I took a second to orient myself and calm down, when something brushed past me in the water. If I wasn't still paralyzed, I would have shit myself. It came again, a massive dark silhouette shooting through the water just above the sea floor. In its wake, I could see thousands of the strange bulbous feelers being pulled up off the seabed. That's when I heard it, the familiar, lovely call. It was Shay, and I quickly began to see several other familiar shapes as the rest of the pod joined her. They shot through the dark like torpedoes, making an odd clicking vocalization that I had never heard before. Strange filaments like the one that had grabbed me and Marv trailed upwards from the mass, but the whales gracefully ducked between them and continued to skim the ocean floor, kicking up clouds of sediment and thousands of individual feelers. Eventually, I felt Shay and several of the others nudging me towards the surface. They even gave me time to decompress before pushing me up to the surface. It took about an hour of sitting on the surface, Shay gently nudging me and clicking in what I assume was concern, before I finally regained enough mobility to climb back into my boat. The old girl seemed pretty excited when I finally managed to flop inside. I guess whatever was down there didn't really appreciate having its lunch stolen, so now it seems to be killing the salmon. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I'll be damned if I let them starve. That was the last entry in the journal, and the writer is apparently missing or deceased. Still trying to see if I can actually get my hands on the journal itself or some pictures of it, but the owner is a very odd person and being uncooperative at the moment. I'm going to leave for a bit and maybe come back with some more stories later. This is another story from Frank, if you remember him from one of the earlier deep sea threads I posted in. In case you weren't in those threads, Frank was my diving instructor. Absolute legend, been around a while and seen lots of strange shit. He never told me exactly where or when this took place. It's kind of irrelevant in any case. He was taking a group of new diver trainees out on a dive for their certification. Usually, they start you out in shallow water. After a few dives, they take you out somewhere deeper. Frank goes out into the ocean a ways to get you used to the sensation of being underwater and being unable to see the bottom. It's an important thing to get used to if you're a diver. There's lots of places where the shelf will become a sheer drop-off or potentially hundreds of meters straight down into nothing but abyss. If you're not used to it, just seeing it can induce panic and terror in certain people. The deep does that to certain people, and I would recommend not becoming a diver if you have some sort of phobia or fear of deep water. Facing your fears is great and all, but having a panic attack while you are 40 meters underwater is a bad idea. Frank said, and people who got panic or scared of deep open water were pretty common. Hell, I got pretty scared my first time. But he says there's another reaction he's seen. He's only seen it once, but he's heard of it from other diving instructors. The only way he could describe it is the call of the deep. They dropped into the water off the boat, and Frank could immediately tell something was off. This kid hung back from the group, staring straight down into the water. Frank tried to pull him back, but he shook off his arm and started swimming away, straight down. Frank waited a second, then started after him. He caught up at about 30 meters and grabbed his leg. The kid looked back at him and smiled, then pushed away and continued going straight down. Frank followed him for a bit and tried to stop him again, but the guy just kept going further and further down. Eventually, Frank had to stop and let him go or risk dying himself. To this day, Frank says it's the most unnerving shit he's ever seen. What could possibly compel a man to swim straight down into the ocean? What did he think awaited him down there? The kid's body was never found. The parents sued Frank, but he was exonerated by testimony of the other trainees who backed up his claims. Police chalked it up to the kid being suicidal, but I'm pretty sure there's a long list of better ways to kill yourself. And like I said, this isn't an isolated incident. No cause or motivation has ever been determined, and the reason for why these people swim to their deaths remains a mystery. Okay, time for a repost. This is the first story I posted on here. Figured some anons in this thread might have missed it. I was doing a recovery dive in a local lake for the police. Some idiot kid who hadn't worn his life jacket while drinking on a party boat. It was deep enough to require mixed gas to avoid narcosis. I was following the normal protocols, keeping in contact with my diving partner, watching my dive computer. It doesn't take long to get to the bottom, getting back up always takes much longer. Me and my partner split to cover more ground because visibility was extremely low. It must have been around 5 minutes before I saw it. There was a human silhouette standing upright at the bottom of the lake. I swam closer and found a man, perfectly preserved without a sign of decay on his body. He was buried in silt up to his shins. It really looked like he could still be alive, or had only been dropped off into the water a few moments ago. I tied a line to him and started to head back up to the surface so I can get the boat team to haul up the body. So I swam up, letting the line play out behind me until I reached my first safety stop. While I'm waiting for my body to decompress so I can head further up, I noticed that the spool of line is still being pulled out even though I've stopped. It's completely taut and rolling straight down at a blistering speed. It takes me about half a second to realize that my reel is about to run out and I'm about to be sucked down by the line. There's a good 900 plus feet on my line, and the speed it was being reeled out was so tremendous that as soon as I tried to grab it, my hand was split almost completely open to the bone. In retrospect, that was a dumb thing to do, but it was just basic instinct to grab the rope and try to cut it with my knife. I get a sudden IQ boost and instead cut the straps holding the reel to my suit a few seconds before the line runs out and it vanishes into the murky water within about half a second. I feel as if the force of the whiplash alone would have been strong enough to break my back and kill me if I hadn't cut the straps. I'm pretty shaken at this point, more shaken than I've been since I found my first dead kid. But still, I managed to ascend slowly and take my safety stops despite the pain, fear, and of course all the blood leaking out of my hand. Good thing this was a freshwater dive, or I might have been in real trouble on my way up. Anyway, my knee-jerk reaction and what everyone else told me was that it was narcosis-fueled hallucinations. Divers see all sorts of shit when narcosis kicks in. I've heard stories of fish and squid with human faces. Some guy swears he was face-to-face with Cthulhu. My point is, narcosis is, to an extent, like temporarily being on DMT, and it can make you see some absolutely crazy shit. The thing I can't make sense of is how I got the cut on my hand. It's clearly from a rope. It's not clean enough to be from my knife or any other sharp object. The doctor even noted that I had friction burns all surrounding the cut. So what the fuck caused the cut if I was hallucinating? And if I wasn't hallucinating, what the fuck could drag out a line that fast? What really keeps me up at night is that the guy was resting on the bottom of the lake, and my line was going straight down. So either he was pulled through the bottom of the lake, or something with incredible strength and speed grabbed my rope and was reeling me in like a fish. I'm not sure which is worse. For anyone out there who liked the stories from my old friend Frank, you're in for a treat. I visited him yesterday and got him to spin me a few new yarns that I think you guys will love. This story is one of his, from back before he left commercial diving to be an instructor. Frank was doing a fairly normal job. Basic rig inspection on a jack-up rig, inspecting the gears and pinions before they moved to the next drill site. The depth was an extreme end for a jack-up rig, just under 600 feet. I say this is extreme for a jack-up rig, but that's because it's a portable rig with legs that sit on the bottom of the seafloor, so it can't drill as deep as a floating rig. As Frank was doing the inspection, he felt something like a long rope brush the top of his head. He twisted around and saw what he describes as the biggest squid he's ever seen in his life, floating aimlessly in the current. The body was massive, with ears near its head, and nearly a dozen long, thin tentacles that stretched down so far you lost sight of them in the gloom. Frank stared at it a bit, both in awe and fear. I did some research, and he was never in any danger. This particular type of squid is likely passive and uses its long tentacles to feed on plankton. One thing that is odd is the depth at which this squid was at. Bigfin squid are normally found at much lower depths. Frank watched the squid for a few minutes as it floated nearby, then turned back to his inspection. After a few minutes he looked back and it was gone. He looked all around but he couldn't find a trace of it. That species of squid are rarely seen and little is known of them, but they have never been observed to move at high speeds. You might want to sit this next one out if you have a combined phobia of the deep sea and spiders. Now, spiders aren't the sort of thing that you'd encounter in the ocean. I know there are aquatic spider species, but those usually are very small and live in ponds. Spiders aren't something you'd think to be seen at, say, the bottom of the ocean. Well, I'm here to inform you that sea spiders absolutely do exist. They're mostly harmless, but then again, so are most land spiders. They're long, gangly things that are all legs with two grasping arms and a proboscis for sucking up their prey's insides. Not supposed to get any bigger than about 2 feet in diameter. And I say not supposed to because lots of strange things seem to happen at the bottom of the ocean. Our intrepid diver in this story was after some sunken treasure and had just dove to investigate what he hoped was an undiscovered wreck that he had spotted on sonar. He descended to the bottom, but to his dismay, the wreck was simply a strange rock formation on the bottom. Disappointed, he prepared to ascend. Just as he checked his dive computer, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a massive wall of sand approaching from behind him. Underwater sandstorms aren't anything unusual. They're just like sandstorms above water, except significantly more wet. It's just currents stirring up the sediments and throwing them around. Our friend managed to grab onto a rock and hold his position steady as the current slowly faded, leaving only murky waters filled with sediment. Letting go of the rock, he turned upward and came face to face with a large barracuda impaled on the end of a long transparent tube. The tube stretched up and vanished into the murk. Visibility was below 10 feet. Now, the diver was getting spooked, so he went back to the bottom and swam along the ocean floor for a while to bypass whatever had skewered the fish. That's when he nearly ran face first into its leg. According to his description, the leg was skinny proportionally, but still about 1/4 of a foot in diameter, and it stretched up into the murk above him. He stared up at it for a few seconds, then it began to ever so slowly move, gripping the ocean floor as it moved the rest of the mass that must have hung suspended above, hidden in the murk. The thing moving spooked our friendly treasure hunter enough for him to probably break a couple Olympic records in his mad dash/swim to safety. Fortunately, he retained enough sense to wait at his safety stops, though I can hardly blame him for being scared after seeing a giant underwater spider. This next story is one of mine. It's a bit mundane, as far as the stories in these threads usually go. Nothing supernatural or unknown at all, just a normal dive with normal sea life. You might have noticed that the fish that got so unfortunately skewered by a giant sea spider in my last story was a barracuda, and you guessed it, this story is about barracuda. They have a really bad reputation, which is granted, is somewhat warranted. They can get big, around 7 feet long, and they have a mouthful of giant razor-sharp teeth that can shred through flesh like knives, and they have a tendency to hunt in massive packs. Oh, and there are all sorts of stories of people getting mauled by them. The truth is, barracuda have been somewhat maligned by the media and rumor mill. They rarely attack humans. Most cases of attacks are due to the fish mistaking a shiny, dangling object like a necklace or bracelet for food, or spear fishermen trying to wrestle their catch away from an uncooperative fish. Of course, those are all the rationalizations that was running through my head when a pack of 6-foot-long barracuda began shadowing me on a nighttime dive. Why was I diving at night, you might ask? Why the fuck would any sane man do that? I don't have an answer to that question, other than that I think anyone who has ever dove at the bottom of the ocean as part of their job probably is a little bit crazy. I spotted their eyes first with my flashlight, silver gleaming dots in the distance. I immediately switched off my light and went dark for a bit, hoping they wouldn't notice me. Because the last thing you want when you are swimming alone deep in the ocean late at night is to get noticed by a pack of large predatory fish. After a few minutes I turned on my light again and almost shit myself when I saw the very big eye and also the very big teeth of one of the barracuda right next to me. And yeah, they're not supposed to hunt humans, but that didn't make me feel any better. These things were big, mean as hell looking killing machines, and if they decided that I was lunch for whatever reason, then I would be lunch. There's no getting away from a pack of 6 feet silver torpedoes with razor-sharp teeth, so I very slowly and carefully turned around and headed back up, having decided I'd seen enough of the ocean for that night. My escorts tagged along, all 8 of them. They never harmed me, and I'm not sure why they were following me. Could have been pure curiosity. I've had a lot of fish swim by to check out my light when I'm diving/welding underwater. Not really the typical story I post here, but it was a very spooky experience for me, to be followed by these very large deep-sea predators. This next story isn't from a diver, rather a guy who was working on one of those big cruise vacation ships. It was the tail end of the trip, and most of the passengers were either drinking or asleep. This guy was a cook and had finished his shift. He was just relaxing on deck and watching the glowing dolphins swimming through the water beside the ship. If that threw you for a loop, there's this type of plankton that glows when it moves, creating this mesmerizing glow around any moving objects nearby. It's cool as fuck, and I would highly recommend anyone interested in the sea to take a vacation to a place that has glowing beaches. It's cool as fuck and also very romantic. Explanation aside, our intrepid cook was sitting out on the railing, watching the dolphins leave glowing trails through the water beside the boat. It's the sort of thing that makes working at sea worth all the boredom and loneliness worth it. Unfortunately, after a few minutes, the dolphins left and the chef was alone with his thoughts. Which is when he noticed that there was now something else swimming alongside the boat. Whatever it was big. He couldn't see the shape too clearly because it was a fair ways below the surface, but the glowing plankton gave him a rough view of the outline. He described it as long, serpentine in shape, and at least 100 feet long, if not longer. He watched it follow the ship for a ways before it dove further down and out of sight. Continuing on with the themes of lights underwater, I have another story from the same cook. There's not much to this one, but I think it's still interesting. He claimed to have seen, on multiple occasions, inexplicable glowing lights coming from below the ocean. Different colors, sometimes glowing red, green, or yellow. He described it as something completely different from the glowing plankton. The lights would appear and disappear, sometimes they would blink or flash. Some of them would remain in place, others would follow the ship or move in erratic patterns. Once he got close enough to get a better look and saw a glowing orb floating just above the ocean's surface, which then shot away from a boat at extremely high speeds. I've heard of similar things from lots of sailors, and I've never heard of a satisfactory scientific explanation. So much about the sea, even on the surface, still remains unknown. Last story for now before I have to leave for a bit. This is another one from Frank, and it's a good one. During his time as a commercial diver on the West Coast, Frank made a friend. And with a friend like this, who needs enemies? Frank first met his friend while doing a basic maintenance checkup on the local marina. He was checking on the moorings and making sure they were in good condition when he noticed something strange. One of the mooring chains appeared to be sticking straight out of a large rock on the ocean floor. Frank moved in to take a look, and sure enough, the chain was somehow embedded in the rock. Perplexed, Frank felt around where the chain entered the rock and noticed something even stranger. The rock felt distinctly unlike a rock. In fact, it felt very soft and squishy, and it was looking at him. The color of the rock suddenly flashed to white, and then the entire thing vanished in a cloud of dark ink. You might have guessed it at this point, but Frank's friend is a Pacific giant octopus. They can weigh around 600 pounds, and if measured from tentacle to tentacle, can grow over 30 feet in diameter. They also have the ability to change color of every cell in their body, allowing them to mimic nearly any object on the seafloor. They're big, next to invisible, and can be very, very smart. So it was fortunate for Frank that this particular octopus, who he named Frederick, was just another prankster and not a serial killer, like some reports of giant octopus I've heard. Over the next few months, Frank would encounter Frederick on various dives, imitating some strange object, flashing light upon being discovered, and swimming away in a cloud of ink. After a while, Frank simply assumed that anything strange he saw was just Frederick playing a prank on him and ignored him, which would lead to Frederick tickling the back of his head while he wasn't looking or playing with the valves on his equipment. After being ignored one too many times, Frederick turned off Frank's oxygen regulator briefly before turning it back on. After that, Frank made sure not to ignore him, and would occasionally bring toys or things down from the surface for him to play with. This odd relationship continued for most of the year until about January, where Frederick disappeared for several weeks. Frank said that he was relieved, but I think he was worried about what happened to his friend. Frank eventually found him at the same marina he had first seen him, wrapped around the chain and disguised as a rock. His skills of disguise seemed to have gotten dull, as the rock looked distinctly unrock-like and was covered in strange white spots. Frank waved hello, his customary greeting to Frederick, and after a pause, Frederick waved back. He flashed white briefly, then changed back into the color of a rock. Frank hung around for a while, but Frederick didn't seem to be interested in playing hide-and-seek or any other games, so he went back to his inspection. After a week of half expecting to spot Frederick somewhere out on one of his dives, Frank returned to the marina. Frederick was still there, wrapped around the chain. He was no longer disguised as a rock, and his skin was a bright red mottled with white spots. He waved at Frank, flashed white, and then turned back red. Frank had brought some fish with him, but Frederick refused to eat or move, staying anchored around the mooring chain. Frank came back the next day with a lobster, which was apparently Frederick's favorite food. He was still there, hugging the mooring chain. He refused to eat the lobster and didn't wave to Frank or flash white like he usually did. The next day, he was gone. Frank came back once a week for the next month before finally giving up on seeing him there again. Sometimes still, Frank will inspect strange rocks or objects he sees underwater, in hopes of seeing Frederick one last time. You can find lots of things at the bottom of the ocean. A friend isn't usually one of them.
That's so crazy. Did Fred die? Or was he dying and then went somewhere to die? Wow. Imagine this being living there, self-aware, wondering why it has this amazing intelligence, observing life, seeing a human being playing tricks, etc., and then finally saying goodbye. I don't know anything about this stuff, but it turning red, etc., sounds like he was dying and losing control over his body. The story is so sad. Octopus typically die soon after they mate. The females remain alive long enough for them to guard the eggs, but males develop a form of dementia and stop eating right after the mating is over. Their body basically self-destructs and consumes itself for energy until the death occurs.
Giant Pacific octopi are semmelporous. They breed once before death. After reproduction, they enter a stage called senescence, which involves obvious changes in behavior and appearance, including a reduced appetite, retraction of skin around the eyes giving them a more pronounced appearance, increased activity in uncoordinated patterns, and white lesions all over the body. While the duration of this stage is variable, it typically lasts about 1 to 2 months. Death is typically attributed to starvation, as the females stop hunting and instead protect their eggs. Males often spend more time in the open, making them more likely to be preyed upon. Fred became a dad.
F.
Have sex. Die. Would you anons do it?
Okay, I'm back. Got 2 more stories for those of you still hanging around. These are from the same treasure hunter guy who told me the story about the giant sea spider. He was deep out at sea, scanning the seafloor in an area known for shipwrecks to see if he could find anything. He'd been doing it for most of the day with no success. He turned away from the screen for a second to look at something else, and looked back barely in time to catch the tail end of an absolutely massive blip on the sonar disappearing from the scan radius. Never got an exact measurement out of him, but it was too big and too fast to be a whale. Right after this, he hears something strange coming from the ship's starboard side, and looks up to see a massive rogue wave bearing down on his boat. He barely had enough time to turn into it and avoid being capsized, and a bunch of his stuff got soaked or washed overboard. Apparently the sea was completely calm, barely a cloud in the sky, and no wind at all. Last one for this week, but I saved one of the best for last. Again, this story comes from our intrepid treasure hunter. I'm going to call him Carl from now on, just to make writing these a bit easier on myself. Carl was a week into his 2-week treasure hunting voyage/vacation. So far, he had little success, and today wasn't any better. It was getting near lunch, and so far all he had done is sit around drinking beer and watching his sonar. Finally, he spots something that piques his interest. A long, pole-shaped object jutting out of the ocean floor and propped against some sort of large rock outcrop. More often than not, Carl says that stuff like this on sonar ends up being just an old waterlogged tree that sunk to the bottom. But there's always the chance that it's the mast of a long-sunk ship that was shattered by undersea currents, its treasures and artifacts spread along the sea floor. Hoping for a much-needed win, Carl prepped his gear and dove. The descent was uneventful, visibility good, and he was able to spot the wreck from a good distance away. He became more and more convinced that it was a wreck the closer he got, and his excitement grew. Finally, reaching the spot, he discovered that the beam was in fact jutting out of a rock rather than leaning against it. The rock was weathered and covered in dead coral and barnacles along with the mast, but the shape was distinctly similar to the hull of a large ship. An intact hull means intact treasure, and Carl eagerly began to search for an entry point so he could investigate the interior. After a few minutes of searching, he couldn't find a single hole or break in the coral-encrusted exterior of the wreck, which is a bit odd given that the ship had sunk. Carl almost gave up hope until he came across something extremely strange. There was a door, perfectly preserved, sitting embedded in the side of the hull. Carl's first instinct was to open it, but out of nowhere every single one of his instincts started screaming alarm bells at him. He hadn't seen a single fish or sign of life on or near the wreck. The wreck was old, too old for there to be a perfectly preserved modern door complete with an unrusted brass handle in the side of the hull. He pulled back and took another, closer look at the wreck, as a heavy sense of dread began to overtake him. He found a patch of the mast where the coral crust had fallen away, and it revealed the true surface. After knocking on it a few times, Carl realized that the mast wasn't made out of wood, it was stone. If the entire wreck was petrified, it was very, very old. Much too old to make any sense, and much, much too old for there to be a completely preserved modern door in the side of the hull. Who the hell puts a door in the side of the ship's hull, anyway? The sense of dread Carl was fearing became overpowering. Every single one of his senses was screaming at him that he shouldn't be here, and that he didn't belong, that something was very, very wrong. But there was no way he would just come all the way out here, make the discovery of a lifetime and just leave, so he swallowed his fear and headed back towards the door. He wasn't going to let nerves take what was possibly one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the century away from him. As he swam around the hole to the section containing the door, the fear intensified until he described it as, it felt like having a complete mental breakdown. Still, though, he pushed through his fear and towards the door. As it came into sight, he noticed something was wrong. The door was ajar and slowly opening from the inside. Carl sat there for what must have been a few full seconds, watching the door open, his entire body screaming at him to run. That was when he felt something else, something watching him from inside the door. Something that Carl could only describe as pure, unthinkable evil. Carl made a mad dash for the surface, hyperventilating and screaming into his mask, not daring to look back as he could feel a presence following behind him, watching with hungry eyes. He shot straight to the surface without any stops, flopped onto his boat, headed it back towards land at full speed, and managed to call the Coast Guard for help, despite being racked with pain from decompression sickness. He was picked up off his boat in a helicopter and flown to the nearest decompression chamber. Thanks to the quick rescue, Carl survived, albeit with permanent joint damage and some paralysis in his left leg that put an end to his treasure hunting career. He refused to share the location of the wreck with me. Some things on the bottom of the ocean aren't meant to be found. I'm going to begin tonight with one of my own stories that I haven't told yet. We're also going to try and investigate the phenomenon I witnessed, which has been corroborated and seen by many other commercial and hobby divers. If you've been diving a lot, or spend a lot of your time around divers, you might have already guessed what I'm talking about. Black divers, one of the most persistent and unnerving legends that has plagued diving since the time of giant metal bell helmets. We'll dig into possible causes and explanations for this phenomena after I've written up my own encounter with them. This story comes from early in my time as a commercial diver on the Hibernia rig. The rig is the biggest in the world and is absolutely massive, basically a small city jutting out of the sea floor. The entire thing is on top of a massive concrete platform settled on the bottom of the ocean that's also used to store barrels of crude. Even back when I was doing this, safety regulations were very important. Unlike most of my other jobs where I mostly inspect or repair the integrity of the structures themselves, I was checking the oil storage itself to ensure it was safe, secure, and not leaking out of containment. It was good work, steady work inspecting the site nearly every day, and it paid well. Usually I worked with a group of 2 other divers. The day this happened was like pretty much any other. The weather was shit, the onboard chef's omelet was delicious, and the rig workers were assholes. Nothing new. Began the dive, reached my target, and began the inspection of lids, seams, etc., and taking water samples as well to ensure no minute particulate leakage. After a few minutes, I get a feeling on the back of my neck that I'm being watched. I turn around to see one of my partners floating a distance away from me, watching me work. I wave at him and give the OK sign to signify that I am okay, and he returned it. I wasn't sure why he was watching me instead of doing his own work, but I really didn't give much of a shit. I had a feeling in my gut, though, that something wasn't right. I mulled it over in my mind while I worked. Something about him had seemed off, but I had no idea what it was. So I turned around again after a bit, and sure enough, he was still there, watching me. I waved to him and made the OK hand sign again, and he returned it. Something about the way he did it made me feel disgusted and repulsed. The fingers looked wrong, if that makes any sense. I don't remember enough detail to describe exactly how they moved incorrectly, but I felt a distinct uncanny valley level of repulsion upon seeing it. I was looking at something very, very wrong. My gut instinct was screaming at me that this guy was dangerous. That's when I realized what had actually been bugging me initially. The guy didn't have any bubbles coming out of his regulator. Oh shit, this guy has a regulator. My diving partner has a rebreather. This isn't my diving partner. Wait, oh shit, how the fuck can this guy be giving off 0 bubbles without a rebreather? Here's where I need to explain a bit of technical stuff for the non-initiated. Regulators are those typical scuba masks that you see. You breathe in air from them and exhale into the sea. Rebreathers are much bulkier and they recycle the air you're exhaling and reuse it so that you get more bang for your buck. Better for longer/deeper dives than a regulator. Regulators make bubbles, rebreathers don't. Like I said, all of our guys on the rig used rebreathers. It was company policy and it was just full stop the best option. This diver was using a regulator, and on top of that, he wasn't making any bubbles, which was just screaming all kinds of wrong. I stare at him for a second as he just floats there, staring back at me through the gloomy water. My stupid search and rescue recovery instincts kick in, and I assume this diver is having an emergency malfunction with his rebreather and cannot breathe and is possibly already unconscious or dead. So I try and stuff down the blaring warning signs in my gut and swim over to him as quickly as I can. The warning signs in my gut get worse the closer I get. There's just something about this guy that is wrong somehow. I can't describe it any other way than I knew instinctively that he should not exist, that he was wrong. My gut finally got the better of me just as I reached to pull off his broken regulators so we could share my rebreather on our way up. I stopped my hand a few inches away from the mask, and I felt an intense jolt of fear staring down into his mask. There was nothing behind his mask. It was completely empty. No eyes, no face, no skull, no corpse, nothing. Just empty blackness. I reached out with my hand and touched the top of his head. His wetsuit hood squished inwards as I pushed, deforming the shape of his head. That's when it moved. The thing turned its mask up towards my face, raising its hand and making the OK sign again. My body was in full fight or flight mode at this point, and though I'm no pussy, spooky phantom divers are pretty far past my limits of what I'm willing to fight. So I swam the fuck away, putting a decent distance between us before I dared to look back. When I turned around, I saw the diver floating backwards into the current, leaking black oil or blood or something from his mask, arms, and legs. It wasn't long before he was hidden entirely behind a black cloud, vanishing into the murky sea. I went back up to the surface as quickly as humanly possible, assuming that I had a bad mix of gas or a malfunctioning rebreather causing narcosis. The maintenance crews never found anything wrong with my gear, though that doesn't rule out the possibility of narcosis hallucinations.
Man, it sounds like you encountered some highly capable squid. Yeah, it definitely is some kind of squid that is either friendly, interested in human enough to imitate something that doesn't signify danger, as opposed to what would happen if you saw a human-sized squid just staring at you. Some of them not only insanely intelligent, but have literal active camouflage and can change their entire texture. How you figured that?
So, as promised, a bit of analysis/insight into this particular phenomenon. There's a couple of different names for them: phantom divers, ghost divers, black divers. The stories aren't all the same. There's two basic types of phantom diver encounters: the ones with a body and the ones without. Some people report seeing a corpse or skeleton face behind the mask. Others saw what I saw, which is a seemingly empty black void with nothing inside except water. The common thread shared through most stories is the lack of bubbles, and the black blood or mist emitted by the phantom diver. Not all stories have the black mist, but the majority do. There's a couple possibilities for this. It could be an actual supernatural phenomenon. Weird shit happens in the ocean. Divers die all the time. Could the ocean have some sort of property that traps the souls of those who die here, dooming them to float aimlessly on currents as ghostly phantoms? I won't outright rule it out, because weird shit happens in the ocean. I've seen stuff that defies explanation time and time again. It could also be like what I call a mind virus. You see it a lot amongst the DMT or psychedelics community. The drugs are a window into your subconscious thought process, so if you go in with certain expectations or knowledge, even if you don't realize you are, it will affect your experience. It's possible that people see phantom divers because they've heard stories about them, and it's something their subconscious mind jumps to when it experiences narcosis hallucinations. Which would mean by spreading these stories, I am in fact contributing to the spread of this idea. The last possibility is very much related to the next story I have for you. I'll save it for after I've typed it up.
Describe how the fingers were wrong.
It happened quite a while ago, and my memory is far from perfect. If I said that I remembered the exact detail of what made the fingers wrong, I'd be lying. There was something about the way they moved when he made the hand signal. It was like someone had studied exactly how a human hand functions without ever having a hand or using it. And so there was just something missing in translation, an innate humanity in the gesture that was completely absent. This next story was written by the same old biologist who allegedly had a deep-sea ROV he was operating eaten by the black carpet back in one of the first threads I posted on here. One of the biggest questions we face as a species is the question of sentience. What makes us sentient? What allows us to exist consciously? Self-aware? Why do we exist? What fuels our search for other life out there in the stars? But I would posit that we are searching in exactly the wrong direction. The effort, time, and resources to reach the stars are vast, and our chances of discovering any life, let alone intelligence, sapient, sentient life, are astronomically small. That isn't to say that we shouldn't explore the stars, only that we should finish exploring our own planet first. 80% of the Earth's oceans are unmapped, unseen, and unexplored. Dark chasms of unknown depths never seen by human eyes, teeming with undiscovered species and wonders. What are the chances that some undiscovered form of intelligent life exists, somewhere in those unfathomable depths? Very, very likely, in fact. I'm nearly certain that it does exist. I've seen the evidence with my own two eyes. It was another voyage, chasing after that profane and accursed siphonophore. The blasted thing has ruined my academic credibility and resisted my best efforts to record, observe, or prove its existence. I have not given up the search, but I grow more discouraged every year my prize eludes me. Even so, I saw something on this dive perhaps even more shocking, intriguing, and abominable than even that titanic black carpet of creeping flesh that lies at the deepest depths of the abyss. As I dove, it became quickly apparent that several large barracudas shadowed my descent, each specimen measuring nearly 8 feet in length. These inquisitive creatures are quite harmless to humans, despite what deceitful, Luciferian, hysteriatic media sycophants might try to tell you. I felt no fear at witnessing these noble wolves of the sea, and instead welcomed their company. To my immense disappointment, 2 of the creatures vanished in pursuit of a large blue tuna, leaving me with only a singular companion as I plunged headfirst deeper into the abyss. Eventually, he too left me. I was alone with my thoughts for what seemed an eternity. Ever so slowly, the ocean floor came into view through the murky darkness. I beheld a great underwater plateau, perched at the edge of a steep plunge into even greater depths. A swift shadow shot out of the gloom at the plateau's edge in the corner of my vision, and I whirled to face the new danger. To my great relief and surprise, the silhouette belonged to none other than an exquisite bottlenose. The dolphin swum in triumphant arcs around me, squeal chittering in his strange language in obvious delight to himself for having found a friendly light in such dark depths. Despite the affections and welcome from my new friend, I urgently pressed downward to the floor of the plateau with my companion in tow. I imagined at that moment that he must have been following out of sheer curiosity. What was this land ape doing at such a depth during the night? This land ape was on the hunt for big game. The biggest game to ever walk the ocean floor, perhaps. But I was not destined to find my old bane, the colossal siphonophore, today. For upon reaching the plateau floor, I quickly noticed strange, unnatural shaping amongst the rock and coral. Sections worn and carved by water, but seemingly with intent, purpose, and craftsmanship. Strange groove lines ran in circles on the stone seabed, each pattern similar and yet distinct. Astonished, I began to photograph and record as much of this incredible phenomenon as I could, taking video and photo in great detail of the structures. After my manic enthusiasm had waned somewhat, I turned and looked for my bottle-nosed companion. I found him sitting only a short distance away, staring at me with eyes that had suddenly lost their gleaming laughter. That was when it struck me like a bolt of thunder. Bottlenose dolphins never swim this deep. They definitely would never venture to the abyssal depth of the drop-off I had seen this one emerge from. As I had this very revelation, the flesh of the dolphin shifted and rippled in both shape, texture, and color, and I saw the thing's eyes burning with a cold and malevolent intelligence that I had never before and have never since witnessed even amongst the worst of mankind. The thing in front of me was no dolphin, but rather a clever imposter from some yet unknown secretive species of mollusk. There was a moment where both of us locked eyes, daring the other to make the first move. A tendril reached out from the mass and, grasping my camera, slowly but firmly pulled it from my grasp. Apparently satisfied, the creature jetted away in a cloud of thick black ink, leaving me to surface without a single speck of proof, evidence, or answers. I fully believe that the only reason I still breathe is that the creature knew my boat's discovery nearby with me missing would bring greater danger to him than I could by myself. I talked to the old biologist again. We're going to call him Murray to make my life a little bit easier. Now, Murray is a bit of a character. He talks and swears like an old sea captain despite being a marine biologist, and always seems to have a ready excuse for why he has no proof of the things he's apparently seen. I'm not particularly inclined to believe him most days out of the week, but I still find the stories fascinating. I asked him for a bit more in-depth explanation on the creature he saw, and his thoughts on it. His belief is that there's an unknown sentient species of cephalopod in the ocean. Cephalopods are squids, octopus, etc. in case you're wondering. Cephalopods are strange creatures with a remarkable ability to mimic other forms of life. They also have a level of intelligence that is still to this day not been fully studied or documented. Octopus in the wild and captivity have been recorded to wave back at humans in an almost friendly manner. Supposing that an unknown intelligent species of cephalopod existed, if it did not want to be found, it would be extremely difficult or impossible to find it. Their ability to hide and mimic other forms of life is unmatched, especially if matched with a keen intellect. The creature described by Murray was able to create a near-perfect mimicry of a bottlenose dolphin. This is actually completely within the realm of reality. There is a species of octopus known as the mimic octopus that mimics a wide variety of creatures with stunning accuracy. This is achieved via complete control of the shape, texture, and color of its body. It's possible that this unknown deep-sea mimic is also responsible for the black diver phenomena. A cephalopod of sufficient size could easily mimic human movement and mannerisms from the inside of a wetsuit. The black blood to me indicates that this might be the case. I wonder what these mimics might think of us humans, invaders from the land. What secrets or mysteries might they hold? Could they have secret cities hidden in great unknown caverns at the bottom of the sea? What purpose does imitating a human diver serve? Are they just observing us, or are their plans more sinister? The entire idea frankly has me a bit on edge. These things could be hiding anywhere, disguised as anything. I might have swam past one a dozen times, been watched by them hundreds. Do they know me? Do they have a name for me? If these things exist, I think it's better that they remain hidden and that these questions remain unanswered. I tried to convince Murray of that, but he remains dead set on proving that they exist. There's one more question that's itching at the back of my mind. If it was a cephalopod mimic in that empty diving suit I saw, where the hell did it get the suit? They must either scavenge the suits from dead divers, or actively murder divers to steal their suits and gear. I've heard enough stories about murderous octopus to not like where that is going one bit. So, if you find yourself often beneath the waves of the ocean as I do, be wary of any unknown divers and objects that don't belong. Tonight, I'm going to be shining a spotlight on an aspect of the ocean that usually flies under the radar. Something far deadlier than all those sharks, squids, and various denizens of the deep that somehow isn't nearly as widely known or feared. I am, of course, talking about the currents of the ocean. If you've ever been surfing or spent any amount of time in the ocean, you will be able to appreciate what I'm talking about. Current is power in its most raw form. Inescapable, absolute. Once a current has grabbed you, there's no escape. Fighting will just exhaust your energy reserves and kill you quicker. There are many currents that are known dangerous killers. What people never talk about are the phantom currents, like rogue waves. These streams of water seemingly appear and vanish at will within the ocean, sucking divers and swimmers to their death without warning. Superstitions will often tell you the sea isn't awake, she's asleep, dreaming, and she takes as much as she gives. I've had plenty of close calls and experiences with currents, some more harmless than others. The one I remember most clearly, oddly enough, though, is the one where I was in the least danger. It was a normal night dive, as normal as dives at night can be. Anyone who has been on a night dive knows what I'm talking about. The darkness is so black, so complete that it consumes you. The way down is nothing but black abyss in every direction. It takes a lot of getting used to. It still freaks me out, even after I've done it over 100 times. Like most of my non-professional dives, this one was purely an exploratory one. The ocean and everything in it have always held a fascination for me. All sorts of stuff tends to accumulate at the bottom of the ocean, and I'm always trying to find it. My one rule is to look, but never take. The sea takes and it gives in equal measure. If you take from her, she'll take from you. That might seem like a bunch of old sailor bullshit, but has more truth to it than you might imagine. My discovery on that night came near the end of the dive, right before I was about to head back. Just as I made my return to the boat, I spotted something jutting out of the sea floor. It was a raft of sorts, improvised and constructed out of decrepit wooden boards and logs. A few objects lay nearby: an old disposable plastic water bottle, a plastic flip phone, 2 old flip-flops, a metal cooking pot, some cloth sacks, a tiny bottle so overgrown with algae that the rubber nipple looked like a plant sprout. After investigating further, I found another raft, then another, and another. Hundreds of rafts of various construction type, quality, and decay. Many of them must have been hundreds of years old, if not older. One of the rafts had an old flintlock pistol set beside it, albeit rusted to such a degree that it was nearly unrecognizable. The entire area was a massive underwater grave. That's the only way I can describe it. Just looking at it gave me chills, not from danger, but from the profound nature of what I was witnessing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of years of failed voyages on improvised craft collected in one area by an undersea current. I have never found a single bone or body, just the remains of the craft that had sunk beneath them. This story was very personal to me because discoveries like this are the very essence of why I take risks of diving alone at night. Unknown, forgotten, and unseen stories, lying silent at the bottom of the sea. Remnants of a life long since dead and gone, all hopes and dreams and experiences gone with it. I wish more than anything I could have spent longer down there poring over every raft, every item. But my oxygen was running out, and when I returned the next day to the exact same spot, I found nothing but sediment and bare seabed. This story comes from the father-in-law of a young diver that Frank trained. We'll call him Ibrahim. The area of the world that Ibrahim is from has a long cultural history of diving, long preceding modern scuba gear. An entire culture developed over the ages of the songs and stories of the pearl divers, venturing into the depths in hope of finding hidden treasures. And, like with all things, the sea gives and takes in equal measure. For every beautiful, luminous gem of the deep taken from her, the sea will take something in return. Sometimes a ring, an heirloom, a jeweled diving knife, sometimes much more. There's one legend among these pearl divers that has apparently existed in one form or another since antiquity. The name is in their native language, but it roughly translates to the chasm or the hole. It's common to hear it referred to amongst pearl divers talking about a lost friend or comrade. the hole got him. So, what is the hole? It's not a place, apparently so much as it is a thing. It supposedly appears without warning, silently sucks a victim into its gaping maw, and vanishes without warning. The divers don't describe it as a creature, though they do speak of it as a living thing. Descriptions of supposed survivors speak of a giant circular chasm opening beneath them in the seafloor, with a strong current sucking unfortunate divers down into its abyssal blue depths, never to be seen again. This next story comes from a former deckhand on a deep-sea trawler that did fishing off the coast of Australia. I get a lot of stories from that part of the world. Weird shit happens down under, it seems. We call our young, intrepid deckhand Paul. He was trying to earn some quick money working on a fishing vessel, though his career was doomed to be short-lived. There's a couple of details he described that are important to the story. This happened a while back, when Australian fishing was a booming business. Big money was being made, and lots of people wanted in. So it wasn't uncommon to see boats of various sorts being converted into fishing trawlers. The problem with this, of course, being that the boats aren't designed to mount the heavy nets and fishing machinery used by a trawler. Paul never learned about this until his ill-fated first voyage, otherwise he claims no amount of money would have lured him on board. As he described it, the disaster struck on their very first haul. The official story is that their net hit a snag. It was Paul's first time, so it's hard to say whether or not his opinion has much merit. But in his opinion, something had grabbed the net and was pulling them down. And because the trawler was top-rigged as he described it, the entire boat lurched over with the net and capsized in just a few moments. However, it wasn't the ship capsizing and sinking without warning that struck Paul the most. It was what happened after. He dove and swam for safety just in time to avoid being pulled down with the ship. After taking a breath, he dove back down to see if there was anyone he could help. Most of the crew had surfaced already or were swimming up, but one man was swimming down after the ship. He managed to grab the end of the trailing rope and began to pull himself down towards the ship as it rapidly sunk into the gloomy depths. He turned back to look at the surface before sinking out of sight for good. The man's face was etched with the most indescribable agony possible. Just by looking at his face, into those eyes, Paul said he could feel the man's pain. The expression still haunts him to this day. The hopeless eyes, the agonized expression, hair swirling around as he sank further and further beyond the surface's light. Thanks to another nearby boat, almost all the crew survived. There were only 2 fatalities, the captain and his son. This next story is a pretty short one. Last one for the night, but I have a big, juicy one that I'll be posting sometime tomorrow. Not sure when. I'm going fishing with a bunch of buddies. I'll try to write it up between bites. This is a story I've heard through the grapevine in various forms a bunch of times. I suspect it's a single story going through the telephone game over and over again, but it might have been several different stories with similar shared elements. The element that ties all the stories is the one I started this thread out with. The divers are swimming somewhere out in the ocean, far from land. A current appears out of nowhere, sucking one of the divers downwards. It is so strong that the diver is pulled down out of sight within the space of less than 30 seconds, almost before the other divers can react. Some divers have stories vanishing from the middle of a group without a trace or anyone seeing them leave the group. The strangest thing about these stories is the extremely localized nature of the current, as it is always only a single diver that is sucked down while the others are unaffected. If I were to take a guess, it seems like some sort of strange, localized whirlpool phenomenon caused by 2 massive underwater currents colliding with one another. I've certainly seen stranger things at those depths. Well folks, I'm back with the last story for this week. If you enjoy Murray's stories, old cranky biologist who claims the black carpet ate his ROV, then you'll enjoy this one. I didn't know this until hearing this story, but Murray was a military diver during the Vietnam War, in a harbor clearing unit. They did salvage, recovery, repair, rescue, clearing minefields, etc. I don't think any description of mine could do justice of what he saw, so I'll jump straight into his story. I was young back then. Not young, I suppose. I didn't feel too young, but sure was a hell of a lot younger than now. I got signed up for the Frogmen, and it was, well, I sure was thankful to not be out there with the rest of them boys being shot at by Charlie. And, well, I wasn't too afraid of it. The depths, dark, whatnot. We had those, back then it was the circular masks, regulators, and real big clumsy tanks. And it was maybe more primitive than what we got today. But it was really, even the worst missions wasn't too bad. And maybe I felt some guilt about that, because all them other boys were getting shot up by Charlie, and me, my job wasn't nearly so dangerous. So that's why I guess, when they said there was a need for a volunteer from and mind you, I was in the harbor clearing unit, Harbor 1, So when they said that there was a need for a volunteer from Harbor 1 for some mission on the mainland, well, I stood right up and said, yes sir, that's me. They flew me out on a Huey with a bunch of airmobile boys straight away after that. I went to grab my gear, but they said to get straight on the Huey and there'll be gear waiting at the location. There'd be gear on location is what they said. I tried to chat up the airmobile guys on the way in, sort of suss out what the situation maybe was, but they were tight-lipped. In fact, I couldn't get nothing out of no one about the mission until I was right there. Some high-ranking guy, colonel or something I reckon, was there and he points me towards this hole in the ground. And it was one of them VC tunnels that you hear about sometimes from the other GIs who were deployed out there. They'd run in their tunnel to hide, then pop out and shoot you in the back execution-like, and sometimes there'd almost be a whole city down there. They'd have dozens of tunnels and passages and rooms. There was so many of them that we have to have a whole group, a whole division that was called the Tunnel Rats. Them Tunnel Rats was engineers. You think that'd be a pretty sweet gig, pretty safe, but those tunnel boys, they gave them a knife, pistol, and a flashlight and sent them into those holes to clear them out of any VC that would be hiding down there. And they tried gas, and they tried bombs, even flooding the tunnels, but Charlie was a clever devil and he'd build a dozen different ways in and out with some sort of water, like locks that'd keep the bomb from collapsing the whole thing or filling up with water. So eventually they'd just send in one boy in there with a gun to clear it, and I guess if he didn't come back they send in another one after him. Charlie would have all sorts of devilish traps in there. Clever bastards they were. Spears through the walls, bamboo spikes, all manner of venomous creatures hidden. And all of that made for a hideously dangerous job of climbing in those tunnels. So when this Colonel Major whoever says for me to climb in this hole, well I tell him with all due respect to go fuck himself. I'm a frogman, not a tunnel rat. You sir can go fuck yourself is what I said. He says the tunnel got the all clear from the rats already. No traps or Charlie in there. And I was a bit suspicious about that. But they brought out the guy who cleared it, and he told me it was as near as safe as a VC tunnel could ever be. Though beyond a point they'd flooded it by accident, or to cover their tracks. I don't think anybody was certain on that. So that was why they had needed me for the job. Colonel Major Sarge was of the mind that if the VC flooded themselves in or out, then there'd be valuable intel or something important hidden down there at the bottom of that flooded tunnel. So they handed me a pistol and a rope to drag my gear behind with on the account of how narrow the tunnel was. At this point I was more than a bit uncertain about this operation, but what I figure is that if someone had to be doing it, then it might as well be me. So there I was, crawling headfirst into some Charlie hellhole designed by the devil incarnate with nothing but a flashlight, pistol, and dive gear being dragged on a rope behind me. It was a sure tight fit and I've never been too fond of those. And at one point it got steep, real steep, and if there was no way to turn around I was doubtful of being able to crawl up again backwards. It felt a bit like I was going down into hell, with the tunnel narrowing and plunging at such a steep angle, all the slick mud and drops of it dripping down from the roof. It got so tight right near the end that I had a hard time breathing, from the tunnel walls scraping on both sides of my chest and back. It was like being swallowed alive, which was, at this point, I would have headed straight back up if I could. But it was just down. The only way I could go was down. So that's what I did. I just kept crawling as the tunnel was beginning to close on me from all sides. But all I could do was pull myself further in, trying to shine my light up ahead in my mouth, hoping and praying to see a room or wider passage soon. Don't truly know how long I crawled for, cursing that Colonel Stars and Stripes for sending me down here, cursing myself for being stupid enough to actually crawl into a Charlie hellhole voluntarily. I was barely wriggling through the tunnel at this point when I finally spot the reflection of water a further ways down into the tunnel. It's all so narrow now that I'm barely able to crawl or even breathe proper, as I said, but I managed to reach it. So I take my light and I shine it down in there for a bit, and I look to see what sort of room or passage I found. But it was just more of the same blasted tunnel downward and now filled with muddy shit water that you can barely see a couple feet through. So at this point I was wondering what the hell Uncle Sam had sent me down here for with diving gear if when I needed it there was no goddamn room to even put it on, barely enough room to even breathe. I was there for a moment or two, screaming every curse known to man, mostly out of fear of being trapped down in this hellish mud tunnel and with no way out except further down. That was about when I began to notice that the water level was rising slowly, inch by inch toward my face. And like I said, my gear, it's behind me, and there's no room to even reach my arms back, let alone put it on. For a moment I put up a tremendous struggle trying to push myself back, out of the tunnel, but I just ended up getting myself more trapped. Sometime during that, I must have dropped my flashlight because I can remember seeing it rolling down through the mud water and all light vanishing, which left me stuck in there in the total pitch dark, lost beyond all hope of returning to the surface. Only sound I can hear beyond my own screams and curses was the water drops coming from the mud roof of this accursed devil tunnel to hell, and the quiet water whisper as it rose up towards me. I think at that point, and God forgive me for it, but I was of the mind that a quick death being preferable to drowning. But I had gotten the gun. It was in my waistband, I think, and I couldn't quite get my hand back to grab it, so I couldn't even end my own misery. Though at that point of which I resigned myself to death, it gave me a power of sorts. If I was all ready to die, already a dead man, then what danger was there in diving headfirst further into the tunnel's murky waters? I resolved myself that if I was to die in some watery Charlie tunnel to hell, with no chance of my body being recovered or seeing again the light of day, then there was no point of being coward-like about it. So I took a deep breath and plunged, headfirst, and crawling like someone possessed deeper into the depths of that tunnel. I don't recall much of the dive through that last portion of that was where the tunnel had been submerged, like I said. And I don't quite remember most of that. Just that I felt the tunnel widen and that I'm pulling myself out into an empty, open space. I still can't see nothing at all, so I'm trying to figure top from bottom all while my lungs feel about to burst. And I think I saw a glint from my flashlight, which logic would dictate is at the bottom of the chamber, so I swim the opposite direction of that. And that's, well, I was swimming up, you see, thinking maybe there'd be an air pocket up near the top, because I was at that point, hard-pressed for a breath of air, any air at all. Weren't quite in my right mind either, or I probably would have just grabbed my mask and regulator off the rope trailing that was tied up behind me. But like I said, I was real desperate for a breath, chest was burning, head was starting to feel weird. And I was swimming upward near as I could tell when my hand brushed up against something. Couldn't tell what it was in the blackness, but it was cold and felt like some sort of eel or other fish. But I just push it aside and keep going up, and all of a sudden I begin to feel it all around me, pressing up against me. The feeling was, well, it was slimy, slickish like if it was a fish, but all real cold like pressing up against me, and I was pushing them aside and trying to get further up before whatever they were could drag me down with them. Then I got a face full of what I thought must have been some seaweed of sort. It was real fine for seaweed, but it was this wet, stringy stuff. And it was just getting into my hands, this wet slime of stringy sort seaweed. Some sort of worms, I guess, is what I thought it was. Yeah, I guess that's what I thought. I pushed through all of it and finally, thank God, my hands feel an air pocket. I don't think I've ever been so relieved as when I took that first breath. In fact, I was in so much relief that I hardly noticed the smell at first. It was putrid and hellish, about as evil and as horrid as I had imagined most journalists which are masquerading as humans must smell like beneath their suits of human skin that are, no doubt, was flayed from some poor innocent soul without proper consent. But that's, well, I suppose that's a bit irrelevant. Anyhow, the stench, it was truly horrid, smelled like death. The devil and all his demons were down here with me, but at the same time I was real grateful just to be able to breathe regardless of the quality of the air being shit. I stayed what must have been, a few minutes of breathing in that wretched stench before I heard it. There was sounds. It sounded like something else was breathing. Something who wasn't me. At first I was thinking it was an echo, but I hold my breath for a minute or so and I can hear it faintly above the water splashing. It was, I won't lie, it scared me pretty bad, being down there in the pitch black with those things swimming around below me, seaweed worms or whatever all against my body in the water. After a bit, I built up enough courage to dive down and find my flashlight. Had to push my way past those things in the water again, which at that point I had begun to suspect their true nature. Found the flashlight easy enough, being that it was the only light in that hellish darkness, and I can tell you, I was just about as grateful to have had the light as I had been to take that first breath of air again. I go back up, shining my flashlight up through the mud shit water, and I'd see what I'd suspected. Those eels and creatures weren't eels. They were legs and arms and pieces of rotted flesh. The entire roof of the chamber was covered with, well, dead women, VC women. They were all just bloated and floating face down, and their black hair was coming down through the water from the surface. The entire surface of the chamber was, more or less, a human carpet of death and decay. Bodies floating face down, hair. Their hair was hanging down from over their faces, and I was there and I'd seen it, and I had to swim back and push some of the bodies aside. It was difficult, and I wasn't too good just then, but I had gotten back up to the surface. I was just really in a bit of a state. I was in some sort. It was just that I was just, I guess, not feeling that well, because You know that there was the other. I said that she was breathing, right? Well, I had the gun out, and I saw her, and I blasted her. I still don't know. It was, I wasn't intending to, you see. I don't think I intended to. I don't think so. But I saw her, and she had this eyes wide open. Her eyes didn't even react to my light. She must have not been human, because that's why I shot her. I saw her there, almost right next to me, and she had those eyes. So I blasted her right there, and those eyes didn't seem no more. She was just gone with the rest of the dead. She had this long, wet black hair, like the rest of them, I guess. And she was shivering. I think I was shivering too, but she was breathing as well. The rest, they weren't. And she isn't now either, because, well, after that, I took my mask and my gear, and I put all my gear on. I dove back under, and now all my gear is good. I'm good. Got my mask, my oxygen, it's all good, and I'm good. So I dive back under now, and I search. I find another tunnel near the bottom that's leading further down, and near as I can tell, there's no other tunnels besides the one I came from. I consider going back through there, but I chicken out on the account of it being too narrow for my equipment to fit, and overall the unpleasantness of the whole previous experience. So I take the other passage, and I tell myself, I gotta go back down to get back up. This tunnel, it's a bit wider, and it goes down a ways, a real good ways. It ain't comfy and the water is murky as shit, but it's sure as shit better than the last tunnel. So I'm counting my blessings and swimming, and trying to not feel the tangle of her hair, but I'm still swimming down for a long time. Eventually I notice the walls aren't mud no more, but made of some sort of stone, like a cave more than a tunnel. And there was all sorts of creatures, fish with no eyes, strange sorts of bugs and the sort. I guess those VC tunnels tunneled in some sort of cave system. And after, who knows how long, I came out of the tunnel into a chamber. This chamber, it was big, real big. Never even saw no roof or nothing with my flashlight. It was huge. I was pretty much astonished at the sight and quite amazed. It was a welcome thing to see after the narrow passages and all the dead. It was very calming to see. That is until I started to hear it. It was breathing like before, just that it was bigger. I think bigger than I think it should have been. Louder, in any case. I was hearing it again, the breathing. I wasn't alone in there, so I tried to be quiet, real quiet, because it wasn't safe. So I follow the current because the water has to go somewhere. I find another passage and I follow it a while, and the current gets quite strong, and it basically is just tumbling me around in this current. And I figure after all that, it's goodbye, good night. I had a good run, but I'm being thrown around in a current who knows how deep underwater, leading to God knows where in the earth. And I've seen daylight for the last time. Out of nowhere, there's this absolutely blinding light and a thundering roar, and for a split second I must have thought I was dead. But then I was falling and I hit the water and I'm free, and I'm out in the daylight again floating down a river. And that's the end of the story. He had quite a bit of trouble telling me this story for reasons that I think are pretty obvious. I had to coax it out of him. Sorry for the length. I usually try to keep these stories short, but a condensed version just wouldn't have done this one justice. So this happened when I'm working on a crew doing natural research. Biologist. I am here to make their insurance happy, because I am diving in these waters for many years. Stay near them if they dive, stop the bad things from happening. They are doing research with the, Humboldt squid. My abuelito teach me when I'm very young about the Diablo Rojo, which you call Humboldt squid. He was a fisherman, my abuelito. Abuelito would always tell me not to be near the water at night, or I will fall in and be eaten by Diablo Rojo. These Humboldt squid, they are as large as 2 meters, very dangerous. Biologists are working to discover the hunting pattern of the squid. They are using a new sonar to image the squid movements. The data is being inserted to a computer and translates to 3D images. Very nice equipment, very expensive. I think maybe I am here to protect equipment for insurance as much as people. The research was trying to discover why the squid are talking to one another on a hunt. The Diablo Rojo will hunt in a pack of many hundreds, and he swims upward towards the surface in the pack. The sonar was showing a spiraling movements upwards from the deep, searching for prey. Because they are deep squid, the Humboldt must talk to each other from the glowing skin. They changed the pattern, and each pattern has a meaning, though the researchers do not know it. They are trying to discover what the patterns mean, so they watch the sonar, and then I am to go down with them and record the squid pattern. There are many patterns on the squid, some dark edges on the fin of red, some dark red around the eye, some dark red with pale white around the eye. I believe there are maybe 20 variations total in color. There are 2 dives where we examine the squid, and against what my abuelito told me, the Diablo Rojo do not attack us. One does come to feel my arm, but he's not very rough and there's no bite. I think he is tasting me. They have the tongue in their arms. They have 8 arms and 2 tentacle. All squids are like this with 8 arms and 2 tentacle. The difference is that the arms only have suckers on the tip, but the tentacle has suckers on the whole of it. The tentacle suckers also have a sharp claw in them for grasping and cutting of their prey. On the 3rd night of sonar recordings, we have an anomaly. The squid pack on the sonar does not spiral, but rises up instead straight in a line. Biologists are getting very curious. They have never been seeing this behavior before. So we are diving down to see them and discover what patterns they have changed because of this behavior. We reach the pack and see something very strange. There is a new pattern on the squid never seen before. The body is white, but below the eye there is a long red streak that runs down the eye and all to the bottom of the 2 tentacles. And above the eye on the arrow body of the squid is a shape in red, 2 lines across diagonal and an X and another line connecting them at the top. Every squid is having this marking, and they are all stopped in the water that is very shallow for this squid. The biologists are swimming and recording data, taking pictures, but I am not very happy about this. I'm feeling something is wrong, so I tell them that we are leaving. They refuse to come, so I must stay with them. I am still trying to convince them to leave when I notice one of the squid has somewhat strangeness to him. He is the largest squid, maybe 8 feet long, but that is not what is wrong. He has 10 tentacles, not 8 arms and 2 tentacles. All along his limbs are sharp claw suckers instead of just being at the tip. All squids have the 8 arms and 2 tentacles like I said, so this is not right. I tell to the other researcher to come and look at him, and I show him he has 10 tentacles. The researcher is very amazed, which is when I notice. He actually has 2 extra tentacles that are hidden together and made to look like a single tentacle. So this squid has 12 tentacles total, but squid are all only having 10 total limbs, with 8 arms and 2 tentacles. The researcher is going to take a closer look, but that is when everything goes very bad. The big squid is very fast and grabs the researcher, dragging her down before I can pull my knife. And the entire pack is going into a frenzy, flashing red and attacking us. Some are pulling at the breathing equipment, and I help 2 other researchers fighting them away. They are attacking the lights and us and gear very ferociously, but I am trying to fight them with my knife and stabbing at them. One is biting into the head of the guy, but I cut his arm off and he is gone. I am bit many times, and they are cutting me with their sharp arms and tentacle. The old man is bit by Diablo on the neck, and he is squirting dark green blood from his neck. I pinch the vein shut and pull him up with me while fighting off another Diablo. He is coming towards me with his open arms and tentacles forward, so I stab right inside of him, but I can feel him grabbing the knife with his beak, and all his arms and tentacle are ripping at me. So I have to let go of the old man, and I grab the body of the Diablo, pulling him into my knife. I shed through his guts. He is limp and falls away, so I can grab the old man and pinch his blood vessel again. Then we swim to the surface. Fortunately, we are not needing a long stop for decompression because the dive was not very deep. I'm very sad for the woman who was taken by the large squid. She is very nice and beautiful, but I am very happy to save the old man who recover after being taken to the hospital by Coast Guard. I have to make another lie up to the insurance because the biologist does not want to be refused from doing his research. And if the insurance might know the danger of the squid, they will charge many more times the price. Now I'm taking my abuelito's advice to avoid the Diablo Rojo, which I should have done many years ago. Never again do I swim at night. The next story is another one from Frank, who seems to have simultaneously the best and worst luck when it comes to sea life. I saw a great white shark come out of nowhere behind him once, only for it to simply bump him with his nose and move on without harming him or anyone else. The danger in this story, though, comes from a very different sort of creature. If you've read my other stories, you probably know that Frank is a tiny bit reckless, likes to dive alone in remote locations, often at night. This time he's doing a cave dive, at night, by himself, which is pretty much the diver's entire list of do not do this if you want to live. So it's no surprise that he got himself into a bit of a dangerous situation. He was a bit sparse in the details, but the trouble started sometime after he entered the cave. The initial passage was wide, but narrowed significantly before opening into a number of larger passages. Frank had left the initial entry and was pulling himself through the narrowest part of the passage. That's when he felt something bump up against his leg. Immediately, he froze. Something or someone was directly behind him in the narrow passage. It was too narrow for him to look behind himself, let alone turn himself around. So he gritted his teeth and slowly inched himself backwards through the passage. After a few moments had passed without encountering anything, he began to think it had been some curious fish or his imagination. For a second, he thought it might be Frederick playing a prank on him. That's when the creature slammed into the back of his knee at high speed. The force of the impact threw Frank forward, bouncing him between the narrow passage walls. His first instinct was to get out of the narrow part of the cave so that he can defend himself, but the blow had done significant damage and pain shot up his leg when he tried bending the knee that had been struck. Kicking with his uninjured leg and pulling against the walls of the passage with his hands, Frank desperately pushed through the winding passage. Before he could reach an area wide enough to turn around, another blow from the creature struck the back of his other knee. Pain shot up his leg, and as he tried to keep going, something grabbed the back of his flipper and yanked back on it, sending another searing jolt of pain from his knee up his leg. On the verge of panic now, Frank desperately pulled himself forward through the passage, where it finally mercifully widened enough to turn. He whirled around to face his attacker, and found himself staring at the long, fleshy snout and beady eyes of an Amazonian river dolphin. The creature stared at him from a few feet beyond his reach in the narrow passage, partially obscured by the blood now beginning to cloud the water. Frank's first thought was, "You shouldn't be here," which is true. As the name would seem to indicate, Amazonian river dolphins live in rivers, not caves. Not to mention that this was a saltwater cave accessed from the ocean, and this species of dolphin was freshwater. Frank was in the right part of the world to meet one of these dolphins, but the one in this cave was extremely out of place. Of course, whether something should or shouldn't be somewhere didn't change the fact that there was a very large, very intelligent animal that seemed to want him dead, blocking the exit from the cave. The dolphin stayed nearly perfectly still as Frank stared him down into a pair of dead, beady eyes. Slowly, Frank reached back into the leg holster for his knife, only to find it empty. The dolphin didn't blink or move, but Frank said he saw an imperceptible change in the thing's eyes. It didn't vocalize or even move an inch, but Frank knew from what he saw in those eyes that it was trying to kill him. Not because it was going to eat him, not because he was in its territory or any other reason animals usually kill. It was going to kill him because it wanted to, because it liked it. Frank has always said that he's never seen a true sea monster. That thing in that cave, though, he told me, that was a sea monster. The standoff lasted for a few more minutes before Frank decided it was in his best interest to move further down the cave. Slowly, he backed himself down the widening passage, keeping his eyes locked with the killer that shadowed his movements from a distance. The entire time, the thing never vocalized, never made a sound, which scared Frank almost as much as the attack itself. Dolphins wear their emotions on their sleeve, he said to me. They are very expressive creatures, and I've never seen one this quiet, before or since. Frank continues backing down the passage, glancing over his shoulder to see how close he was to the main chamber. Without warning, the dolphin struck, but Frank had been expecting that. He whirled back around, hands out in front of his face. The creature hadn't had enough space to build up a lot of speed, and Frank was able to push the blow aimed at his mask to the side with his forearms before grabbing the thing's snout and slamming it into the cave wall several times. It thrashed and spun, knocking Frank's grip loose. It backed up a few feet and kept its distance as Frank considered his options. He couldn't stay put forever, and the chance of help arriving was slim to none. If he tried to leave the cave, the dolphin would probably just push him back. There was no exit further down the cave as far as Frank knew. Several sections were unexplored, but he didn't want to bet his chance on finding an exit while being chased by a killer dolphin. That seemed like the only option, though, so Frank began to back up further through the passage. His attacker followed him again, albeit at a further distance than before. Right as Frank reached the part where the passage opened up fully, he slowed to a stop with one hand resting on the cave wall. In a flash of movement, the dolphin streaked forward through the water toward Frank. He had only one chance to get this right. "Now that thing was smart, and he knew it," Frank said to me, sipping at his bourbon. "But he didn't know that I knew it, and what else he didn't know, I was smarter." Frank had guessed that the dolphin's goal was to get him past the large section of the cave, where Frank would be unable to properly defend himself in a larger open space with his injured legs. And if he tried to get out of the cave through the passage, it would either drag him back in or kill him in the open water outside. Frank had only one chance to get it right. As the dolphin burst past him, he slammed one hand into his stomach while grabbing the head and snout with the other. With its momentum briefly halted, he pulled it tightly into a bear hug, and that's when he shoved a rock that he had picked up in the cave floor earlier directly into the creature's blowhole. I could tell that it was shocked, sort of. I didn't know quite what had happened at first. Frank mused to himself, staring into his glass. And it couldn't hear me well, let alone understand me, but I said to myself, "Time's on my side now, you son of a bitch." And he knew it too, and scurried off down the tunnel in a flash. I could see him, trying to get the rock loose. There was a few bubbles I saw, but I'm fairly certain it was stuck in there real good. Frank chuckled, drinking the rest of his bourbon, and when I finally got out of the cave back up to the surface, slowly, mind you, on the account of being unable to use my legs, that's when I saw him again in the moonlight. He was gasping for air, all pathetic-like. Couldn't get enough past the rock to breathe proper, and couldn't dislodge it neither. I looked him straight in the eye and then swam away. I'd imagine he perished shortly after, the murderous son of a bitch. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this 2-hour Greentext special. It's kind of a, hey, sorry I've been gone for so long, here's a really long video kind of video. So please, like this video if you enjoyed these stories, smash that subscribe button if you're new here, and make sure to click the little bell icon to be alerted when I have new stories and videos. But until then, don't touch random shit you find in the ocean.